Now, before we jump into today's episode, I want to tell you about something that's worth putting on your calendar. Now, Gladly Connect Live is happening on May 4th through 6th in Atlanta, Georgia. And this one's actually worth your time. It's a curated gathering of over 350 CX leaders from brands like Hoka, Deckers, UGG, Crate & Barrel, and even Bombas socks. Now, nearly half of the room comes from retail and consumer, so you're going to be surrounded by people who actually get what you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Now, this year, there's a session specifically on agentic commerce and how AI agents are starting to shop and make decisions on behalf of customers, and what that means for you from discovery, conversion, and even loyalty. Now, the speakers are actual practitioners from brands like the Black Tux, Ollie, StockX, and even Pact. Now, these are people who have actually done this, not just advised on it. Now, May 4th through 6th, it's going to be in Atlanta, Georgia. There's only 3 weeks away. Seats are filling up fast, so you need to register today at gladly.ai, and the link will also be in the show notes. All right, now let's jump into today's episode.
You're listening to E-commerce Fastlane, the podcast show to help you build, manage, grow, and scale a successful and thriving company, powered by Shopify. Listen to real conversations with partners and subject matter experts as they share proven practical strategies, platforms, and the best Shopify apps to help you accelerate your business. The time is now for you to improve efficiencies, grow revenue, profit, and lifetime customer loyalty. Please welcome your host, startup founder and strategic advisor, Steve Hutt.
Welcome back to E-commerce Fastlane. I'm your host, Steve Hutt. Now, today's conversation is, I'm going to call it a little bit of a ticking clock that's going on right now, because about, hundreds of thousands of Shopify merchants there's something happening right now, and a lot of them don't even know about it yet, and it's Stocky. Now, Stocky is Shopify's free inventory tool. My last count, there's like 120 some thousand merchants that use this tool for purchase orders and a little bit of a demand forecasting. It was pulled from the App Store, I believe, in February, and it shuts down permanently, so it's being sunset, I think, in August 31st of this year, 2026. So if you're one of those merchants, especially if you assemble or bundle your own products, the Shopify admin alone will not cover what you're about to lose with Stocky. And I think there's a bigger picture at play here too from my research. Even before that deadline, most Shopify brands are a little bit running blind when it comes to inventory. And they have an idea what they've sold, but they really don't have any idea what they've actually are making, like what it actually costs to make it, or what is generally available right now to sell, especially if you're assembling a product. And like one brand, I did some research here, one brand discovered almost $40,000 in raw materials that are just sitting there completely untracked. And another one kind of doubled their monthly revenue just after getting their operations kind of into a single system. So there's some really good stories that I want to unpack today. And my guest today is Riikka Söderlund, and she is the Chief Operating Officer of a company called Katana. And what they are is they're a cloud inventory platform. It really built specifically for product brands that are doing between $1 and maybe $10 million in annual revenue, who've kind of outgrown spreadsheets but are ready for the kind of the full ERP solution. Katana really works, with, more than 1,000 businesses, I think almost 1,500 across 70 countries from what I can see here. We're going to learn more about this. And they process over $3 billion in gross merchandise value annually. So they're the real deal. And they have recently closed a $14 million Series B extension, which is really helping build their business up. And so I really want to unpack. I apologize for this being a really long intro, but I think it's really important to set the stage a bit. I think I want to understand, I want to share and learn today about inventory accuracy, why I believe it really should become a growth lever for a lot of brands, not just kind of a back office task tool. And I think Google updates of how the shopping graph works and all these different, there's so many things I want to unpack today. So hello, Riikka, welcome to E-commerce Fastlane.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a really fun episode today, because the thing is that inventory doesn't sound sexy, but it really is incredibly important, especially for makers where there's multiple products going together to manufacture something. That makes it even more complex. So, but I want to talk about the problem that's actually happening in the marketplace right now, and the whole idea about Katana and the kind of the gap it fills, because it really is interesting in the marketplace when you have this stocky solution being sunset and some like clearly 100,000 or more merchants are seeing some kind of value out of it. But now Katana is here, and I want to talk a little about that gap right now and how you fill that gap.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on there. Stocky has been a default solution for so many Shopify brands for multiple years. And the fact that Shopify is sunsetting it is obviously an urgent issue for the brands and the merchants, but it's a symptom of the shift that is happening in market and inventory management becoming more and more and more complex with more channels, more locations to handle, consumer shopping in different surfaces. And it's just not Shopify's core business to run inventory. They are the world's best selling platform, but inventory is its own beast and does require dedicated software. And therefore, Shopify made this decision to sunset Stocky in August this year.
It's interesting when you think about most merchants when they actually think maybe paired with Shopee, they feel that Shopify really is handling their inventory. But I believe there really is a gap in that when you're selling in more than one channel or if you're fulfilling from more than one location. I think that's where Stocky kind of collapses a bit. Can you talk a little bit about that, about the multi-channel and multi-location kind of inventory fulfillment? I think it's a really interesting topic.
For sure. And I think that's of course the bread and butter of Katana inventory as well, as that is very typically the case where a merchant expands their operation to a second channel. Like they have their Shopify store running, but then they decide to start to also sell on TikTok. Or maybe they are also expanding to Amazon, or maybe they have a brick and mortar, like maybe they have pop-up stores. And the amount of complexity that one additional location and sales channel actually adds to your inventory operation, it often comes as a surprise to the merchant because, like you said, Shopify doesn't really track your inventory across multiple locations. It's good at tracking it in Shopify, but once you are selling on multiple channels, you really need to be able to answer to questions like, what do I have in my warehouse? How much of it? How fast does it ship? From where? And when do I need to reorder? Not too early, not too late, but those questions become exponentially harder when there are multiple channels that merchants are selling on.
So interesting. So what are brands doing before Katana? Because it's what I find interesting, and this has happened quite a bit when I was at Shopify. Whenever I did like an app audit or understanding an operational audit of a business, I found that because a lot of team members would come and go, a lot of times there were apps in their admin that no one really knew why they were there, and I feel there was a lot of duct tape going on, maybe point solutions to solve an interesting need, but there really wasn't an overall business strategy around like why we have these apps or marketing platforms or operational platforms attached to the store. What do you see on your end? Because Katana is definitely built more on an enterprise ERP solution, to be quite honest with you, because it seems like you really have thought about all of these pieces versus these kind of disparate kind of point solutions that we see in the marketplace.
Absolutely. I think that's only one layer of the complexity. We, of course, see customers having multiple apps like you described. So you might have some kind of a forecasting app and a separate app for your
Mm-hmm.
3PL. And maybe you have your own warehouse as well. Maybe you are running manufacturing. And none of these apps communicate with each other. So there is no central system of pulling all that data together. But honestly, Steve, it's also a more fundamental issue of it's not even the tools that customers are using, it's that they're not using any tools. They simply don't have visibility to their inventory. They might have an Excel spreadsheet somewhere, and a lot of our customers do. You wouldn't believe how big
Mm-hmm.
of a companies will run their inventory on a spreadsheet that doesn't update, that doesn't link to anything, that is not connected, it's not online. It sits on a desktop somewhere underneath the CEO's table. And that spreadsheet is really their kind of core and source of truth that they then use to manually update the apps that may or may not
I know.
have the relevant and real-time information to actually run your operations. So it is for sure quite a complex web of different duct tape solutions, like you
Mhm.
said.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I always, when I do these app audits, the first thing I think about and tell them once we figure out, okay, why are you using these? And you realize the cost that goes along. And I've heard many times I've had $500 a month apps that no one's even using anymore, and the team members left. So there's certainly a cost factor doing an app audit. That would be maybe a side podcast I need to think about. One thing that you just mentioned there that I thought was quite interesting, and I like to frame it around the marketing and the finance side. I know you're more in the back office and the inventory and the forecasting and these sorts of connections. But I think the problem is I see in the marketplace is that marketing kind of works in their silo. And, and marketing could be, hey, checking inventory levels or thinking about, the forecast that goes along with that. But sometimes marketing is not speaking to finance. And I think that's where that's where the profitability and the cost of goods and understanding the true net profit that's coming out of a transaction. And so, like, what's your mindset about a lot of people's kind of disparate, separate systems or team members that aren't really talking to each other? And then let's bring that gap in close and say, well, here's what Katana does that alleviates these kind of separate systems.
Exactly. I think marketing is a good example of where the cost of goods sold isn't ever really talked about or visited. But obviously, it's just one example that happens across the company in multiple different teams and multiple different functions. And I think the problem gets even bigger when it compounds. I mean, I wish it was just some individual marketing campaign that might draw your COGS down momentarily. But these things compound and very fast. So we unfortunately do see a lot of cases also where customers come to us because they've realized that they are, in fact, selling at a loss and they didn't know it. And that is then the spark that gets them to understand why central inventory management system is really useful and is an actual driver of not just growth, but profitability.
I have a funny suspicion that a lot of people just look at competitors to try to get their pricing, or they use their gut to figure out what they believe they need to sell their product for. And brand plays if you're a premium brand, maybe you can charge more. But if you're, playing in a reasonable commodity market, if you're selling, I don't know, like let's say running footwear and you have a brand, but you're kind of playing in a market of other mid-market brands, you tend to price it based on your competitors. But I think Katana kind of flips that around a bit and says, well, what's the true landed cost, and then talking about fulfillment and talking about potential manufacturing and all the pieces of the puzzle that go together to the true cost of goods. I think it makes it for much more intelligent to make pricing decisions.
For sure. And as you would know better, a lot of Shopify brands are working on very thin margins.
Mm-hmm.
So it really does matter. If you are a product-based business, unless you're in a very luxury space, then yes, those margins are everything. And it is very easy to get blindsided by costs that perhaps you weren't factoring in or just were simply miscalculating. To be fair, it's not an easy environment for merchants to operate right now. There are so many curveballs being thrown at them, costs that are creeping up. Things like, well, we all know that oil costs are going up and petrol is more expensive, but that also means that plastic and packaging is getting more expensive. And every e-commerce store is packing and packaging their goods into something. So like these individual small increases here and there, maybe it's your freight costs that are going up, maybe it's a tariff cost. If you don't add them up and actually calculate them properly, then the margin pressure, it's getting worse and worse and worse. And that is definitely squeezing Shopify merchants. It's getting a little easier based on our data. So we're seeing a little bit healthier margins again. But for the past 12 months, it was definitely shrinking margins from the beginning of last year until Q1 this year.
So interesting. What about Google Shopping? Because I read somewhere just kind of in a prep doc for recording saying it's interesting about I guess almost like the shopping placement or like, this kind of AI product discovery that's happening right now. And I think Google has this thing called the shopping graph. And I think I think this thing updates, I don't know how many billions of times an hour. So it's interesting whether, doing this sort of like, back office work to make sure that they're showing the right products to the right customer with some accuracy. But I feel that maybe a lot of inventory systems are maybe doing only like a nightly sync. I'd like to understand a little bit like how Katana thinks about just agentic commerce in general, or AI kind of like influence, kind of like, discovery and then eventual purchase. Like, how does that all kind of fit together?
Yeah, that is such a good question because I think there is so much hype around this topic that it almost feels like irrelevant or something that's far along in the future, when in fact there are very real things happening right now, like the Google shopping graph that you mentioned. Every e-commerce merchant knows that Google is a key source of traffic for them. And the way that the shopping graph works is that they do check inventory. Inventory is one of those key product data points that Google factors in when they decide what products they show and what products they don't show. So yes, some inventory systems only update once a day, some update once an hour. But if you don't have any inventory system, then there is no inventory information that gets updated. And that's the big gap. If you are not communicating your inventory and stock levels to Google and other AI tools who actually use this information to decide whether or not to surface your product, then you are leaving money at the table already today. It's not a future problem, it's a today problem that most merchants haven't yet started to act on.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I read about it a little bit, and they're saying that like I think Google has like over 50 billion kind of individual like product listings, each kind of with they talk about like price and availability and reviews. I think this is all kind of in association with Gemini, their large language model. And I think it's so interesting how it figures out a natural way of matching both products in real time, but then, then allowing for a checkout to happen. I think this UCP, they call it, this Universal Commerce Protocol. I believe this was a Shopify and Google open standard that's out there now into the wild and being adopted now by a lot of people. I think even OpenAI decided to scrap what they were doing and they decided to go with UCP instead of what Shopify and Google were building. So what's your thought process around that?
I think it's absolutely the future. I think consumers aren't necessarily shopping inside an LLM yet. That shouldn't stop merchants from making sure that they are visible, because at the end of the day, does it really matter where the actual transaction happens? If you're a Shopify merchant, does it matter if it happens inside an LLM or on your website if the customer can't even find you? So it's the same things that merchants need to do to be visible on ChatGPT, Gemini, and all of these language models, and to be actually purchasable. Because if you are a Shopify brand, then you can just turn on the agentic plan, the agentic commerce, so that customers who want to can also buy. But this is also where the customer experience then comes in. You need to be able to deliver that sold products and manage returns. And this was one of the reasons why ChatGPT decided to discontinue their pilot in the checkout inside the chat, because inventory management is simply not there yet. There isn't where they can actually draw the information from. You can't draw it from spreadsheets. And if the model doesn't have inventory information, you can't sell the product. You need to know if you can actually deliver the sell.
Wild times we're living in right now, because
Yes.
I've written a bit about AI visibility, and I think old school, when you talk about SEO, like search engine optimization, I think large language model discovery. Now it's different with AI overviews, when because Google is scraping their own kind of organic results and creating AI overviews on their own, based on their own algorithms of organic placement on their search result pages. But I think all the other large language models, other than what Gemini is doing on Google's .com, they're doing their own scraping and their own algorithm to figure out. And a lot of it comes down to metadata and schema and how you're organizing things on your website. And it's a lot that I've learned. And some big progressive brands are kind of getting the first mover advantage, I believe, because they are getting their data in order, getting their back office in order now for this pending wave of more and more brands and people deciding to use agentic type communication to make purchases. So it's quite interesting what's happening.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to keep in mind that these models are learning. So even if there isn't shopping happening right now, they are learning what brands are out there. Like you said, the big brands, the first movers are actually getting an advantage because the models learn which brands are trustworthy, which ones are the ones who have the data that they can surface to consumers. So it's definitely a trend that you don't want to sleep on because it's quite easy. It's not a difficult task and it's not a capital intensive task to be visible also in agentic commerce.
Yeah, I'll make sure. I have, like I said, a couple things that I've written recently in that agentic AI space and kind of how to get set up and ready. I'll put those in the show notes just so people have direct links to it, just to learn more. I want to pivot a bit over to kind of the multi-channel, I'm going to call it complexity because it doesn't have to be, but a lot of people find it complex when, like you mentioned, the TikTok thing and TikTok shops potentially fulfilling orders through there. Amazon obviously being the major player. I mean, half of e-commerce in North America is done on Amazon. The other half are Shopify stores, pretty much. And so knowing that, it's a really good marketing decision to choose to be on Amazon. You may not have your full product catalog, but from a discovery perspective and just the organic reach that Amazon has and all the Prime members, what's your thought process around connecting? Because I think there's a new connection that launched recently. I think you have an Amazon kind of FBA integration, things like that. I'd like to learn more about what exactly Katana is doing now as it relates to strictly marketplace sellers only. If you're just an Amazon kind of fulfillment, that's what you do. But if you're running both a Shopify store and you're running an Amazon store, how does Katana fit into this mix?
Yeah, for sure. Yes, we did launch a new Amazon integration recently, really to answer to a need in market. Like you said, it's such a prevailing channel of so many Shopify merchants are also selling on Amazon. So there's just a massive need for something to keep inventory in sync in real time across different e-commerce stores, marketplaces, wholesale orders, physical locations, so that there is no overselling, so that you don't need to do manual reconciliation, guessing what's in stock, especially since, like said, the out of stock has now a bigger cost than it used to before. So knowing what you can sell and where you can sell it, and then obviously running the operation of delivering from, if you have multiple warehouses, which warehouse are you delivering it from? Even if it's an Amazon order, maybe it makes sense to deliver from another location that you have set up in your inventory management system. So just that the whole operation of getting your goods in, selling them, delivering them, and replenishing them right on time is what Katana solves.
I want to talk a bit about B2B because I think wholesale is a very interesting conversation because Shopify has really started to put their flag in the sand. And I remember even when I was inside Shopify, I was there for 6.5 years. And, the conversation building out their B2B side, it was mostly on the Shopify Plus side of the business where they'd offered kind of B2B features. I know they bought a few companies, some acqui-hires along the way, trying to get the right people and processes in place. So, but B2B is a much larger opportunity than the direct-to-consumer. If you think about, retail, I don't know how much, I think 70% of total goods and services are purchased kind of in person still, maybe up to high as 30% is bought online. So there's a massive opportunity on the B2B side. How does Katana fit into that? Because the reason I'm asking this question is because it would seem that there are quite a few merchants that are doing wholesale business because that's, higher volumes, lower margin, but net more profit in getting their products out into retail. But then they also want to do direct to consumer. And so knowing that, I get concerned a bit about wholesale and direct-to-consumer orders being pulled from the same inventory and how that the forecasting models all work, knowing that these same inventory, two different types of customers. I want to understand how Katana kind of handles that.
Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. B2B is so much bigger than B2C, and that is very typically the second channel that a Shopify merchant opens, and Amazon is then the third. So Katana has had a lot of those B2B functionalities for a long time already. Just things like making sure that you have visibility to what you can fulfill and when, just managing those purchase orders, maybe shipping them in portions instead of all in one go, having custom pricing. Obviously, pricing is different for B2B than it is to B2C. And this again comes down to your margins, then having visibility to making sure you are selling at a profit. And then replenishment tracking, like you said, that making sure that you are actually planning and forecasting correctly across both B2B and B2C becomes infinitely harder to do on spreadsheets because they are working in such different ways. Larger orders, of course, have longer transit times as well. So many things to consider. So while it might seem counterintuitive to have these both in one platform, it actually streamlines your operation quite a bit to have that visibility to both at the same time and have that control of how much you want to keep them separate. That's then totally up to the customer to decide what kind of a setup they want to put on Katana.
hmm It's interesting too, because I remember once again inside Shopify again, we had a lot of brands that would do like flash sales, or they would offer a part of their retention strategy was some kind of like a VIP offering, like early product drops. Sometimes they would even do like pop-ups in certain markets. And how does Katana think about that? Because I think the problem with you don't want to do overselling, and you want to have some kind of a real-time sync to inventory. And I know it's always been a massive problem. I can remember in the day, like there's some pretty famous case studies of some large influencers that are out to sell, especially in the makeup space. And it's so interesting how it's so quickly things can collapse because overselling, and then there's the bad customer experience that goes along with, well, you allowed me to buy it, now you're giving me a refund, or maybe you've only pre-authorized and didn't capture the money yet, pending if in fact we have the product. So what's Katana's thought around that, and how do you handle these kind of like special product drops and flash sales so that you feel that the inventory is accurate, and then you're able to then that data pipeline is available on the front end, so make sure that we don't oversell.
Yeah, exactly. That is a funny problem. It seems like a champagne problem to have.
Yeah,
Oh my God, I'm overselling.
yeah,
So I'm sure a lot of the listeners are thinking, I wish I
yeah. I
had
wish.
that problem.
Yeah,
But it is, in fact, a massive problem for specifically the reasons that you said. If you can't then deliver those orders, the hit that your brand takes is so massive that you need to be able to manage that somehow. So, at the very least, what a real time system offers is full visibility to when you are able to fulfill those orders, because you have your entire lead times from your suppliers mapped out, and you have visibility to when they can deliver to you and then you to your customers. So you have instant visibility to when you can actually live up to that promise of fulfilling the order of a flash sale, of an influencer drop, of Black
yeah.
Friday. Like
Mm-hmm.
even Black Friday
Mm-hmm.
sometimes still surprises customers. And again, the more important piece here is that you can do it in a profitable way, because it's so easy in these situations then to just make sure you fulfill a big order. But if it wasn't profitable, if your margin actually wasn't healthy,
Mm-hmm.
those can tank an entire year. One
Yeah.
flash sale, one TikTok post can now have a really huge impact on your bottom line. So what Katana can then, of course, do is also help with future forecasting. While one single flash sale or a viral moment is not yet necessarily sufficient to forecast accurately the future demand, it does start to give us a lot better indications, especially now with AI and machine learning, of what kind of preparations you need to have in place in order to then be able to fulfill those without overstocking. So you don't want to do that either. So finding
Yeah.
that optimal balance then for future situations.
What about Shopify POS? Because a lot of brands, I mean, will go to conferences or they'll do pop-ups, and many brands now have a retail location attached to their online store. Does this all work synonymously with each other? Is the store itself? Because I heard this before, where a lot of, and I've even heard this even recently. I've seen this where a lot of brands are fulfilling their online transactions, or like their purchases, from the closest store, and they've got some kind of infrastructure set up. They're running Shopify POS. It almost seems like the inventory by a store level is actually like live inventory that can be used in the fulfillment side of the business. I just want to get your mindset around how Katana kind of connects as it relates to Shopify POS and this whole last mile almost delivery opportunity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And obviously, Katana connects also retail locations to that central inventory to track stock movements and transfers and sales in real time as you're running the business.
Okay.
I think this is also where like warehouse management really does come into play, because it's not just about fulfilling those orders. It's again about then knowing what you have in store, what is left. And that's like, even when I say that, oh, it's in spreadsheets, I mean, it's not in spreadsheets unless you actually manually put it there. So tooling like, warehouse management through your iPhone app or your tablet is, of course, available with Katana as well.
I see. Now, what about connections to other solutions? Because one of the pushback I get from some brands was, hey, we have a current tech stack and things are flowing well. Like we feel things are okay, but maybe from an inventory and a forecasting perspective, maybe they're going to learn a lot today that maybe there's some opportunity for improvement. But the first pushback we get, well, we're running these tools already over here. Let's call it like maybe accounting systems they have currently. Maybe they're running QuickBooks or Xero, or maybe they're running other tools. What's your thought process around how Katana connects to existing pieces of technology, like non-competitive, but it just as part of the overall business workflow?
For sure. And that's really the very core idea and value proposition of why Katana was built in the first place.
Okay.
Because typically, of course, in big enterprises, what you're describing would be handled by an ERP, a system like SAP or NetSuite, or big ERP suite that costs typically hundreds of thousands of dollars and takes multiple months or even years to implement. And that is the very reason that originally, 8 years ago, the founders of Katana sought the market and realized that there actually is no easy to use solution that easily connects to best of breed tools like Shopify, like QuickBooks, like HubSpot. They didn't want a solution that is one size fits all, that does everything.
Right.
That doesn't seem like a very 2020 way of doing
No.
things, does it?
No.
So that connectivity was the very, very core idea that Katana was founded on.
Yeah.
So we like to say that Katana is best served with QuickBooks or with Shopify, and now with Amazon. It's the central thesis of the entire platform that you connect to your tech stack, not replace, not try to build one tech stack with one tool, but connect to it in an easy and effortless manner.
Yeah, you're not a Swiss Army knife of like all things operations. So I totally get it. And I agree, because a lot of brands are using, like ShipBop, like say, for example, or ShipHero for fulfillment. That's just kind of where their 3PL is. And for sure, the accounting side, I mean, a lot are using QuickBooks. It's certainly for their day-to-day kind of bookkeeping, and they still push that data over to their accountant for proper year end. So that's interesting. So I want to make another little pivot over to like what happens when someone decides to like, hey, this whole stocky situation and or other spreadsheet craziness that's going on with a brand. And they decide, hey, I wouldn't mind seeing what Katana could do for my business. Can you walk us through like kind of what happens when they kind of make a decision to maybe get a trial and activate their instance? Can you walk us through kind of what's happening in the background first, and then when can people start using and implementing the system?
So Katana really is so simple to use that you can just go to the website, start the trial, and implement yourself. yes, you can like self-serve to this ERP Lite. And the very first question you will get is actually like, what integrations would you like to set up? And we then set those up automatically for you. But if you think you need a little bit more help, then we do also offer a dedicated solutions engineer for free to actually go through your workflows and your tech setup and create that plan for you of what would be the ideal way of getting you set up with Katana. If you have maybe you are also implementing QuickBooks at the same time and you want to see how those fit together, then we do have a dedicated team to advise you through that process.
And so this would be things, I'm just thinking out loud here, but this would be like just understanding the current workflow or maybe data structure, just kind of understanding what you currently have. It could be spreadsheets, it could be, who knows, some other system. And then would there be like some kind of like a data migration that would happen? Because I'm sure there's going to be existing legacy data that might be important moving forward.
Yes, and that's really the key piece. That's a variable we can't know. So yes, we can migrate your data from an existing system. We can take your spreadsheet and upload it. Maybe your data is in Post-its. I'm not kidding. We've seen those cases as well. Yes, we can then get it online as well, but this is where a dedicated team comes in to advise you on what is the easiest way to get up and running, which typically like our customers are up and running in a matter of weeks. A few weeks is usually enough to get even the more complex data needs handled.
Some things that some of my takeaways, I'm just thinking out loud here and I've written a few notes, but like some of the takeaways that I'm thinking of right now is it's interesting, like brands right now in 2026, I think this acquisition costs are quite expensive. Like just being on Meta and Google, even on TikTok, it's quite expensive. And usually it's usually net zero profit. That's why retention strategies are incredibly important. What's your thought process around all of this now? Because we think about, there's this AI checkout thing going on with this UCP, this Universal Commerce Protocol. There's ChatGPT doing their shopping with, direct links out to the Shopify store. I think the overall, I think the operational stack is just maybe as important as the marketing stack is kind of what I'm thinking here. I'm just curious and kind of like how Katana is kind of framing these changes that are happening right now and just understanding inventory, profitability, I know I'm talking a lot here, but inventory and pricing, profitability, these are all interesting conversations, maybe in their own way, but it's kind of reframing things a lot when we think about agentic commerce and kind of just discovery in general now through large language models and through AI checkout and these sort of things.
Oh, for sure. And my personal background is in marketing. So this is something that I think about literally every day. It is so fascinating
I
right
know,
now
right?
what is happening in the market. Funny enough, I genuinely think that the best thing that a brand right now can do is to find those efficiency savings and cost savings in their operations. It is wild how big of a difference it makes if you're able to streamline your operations and order raw materials or order products in from your suppliers at the right time and not before and then end up paying more from the warehousing or end up having stale inventory that you have to sell at a loss. All those little operational things, they compound to a level where you have then more cash flow to spend on your marketing. But I wouldn't spend it on Meta and Google and the demand gen tools. I would actually spend it on branding right now
I see.
because it is so vital that you have a strong brand in this era of agentic commerce. There's this layer of you need data and product data and inventory, and then there's a layer of brand. And those two are starting to get a lot closer to one another in the coming years. So that's where I would reinvest the money that you can, the savings that you can find in your inventory operation.
I agree with you on brand mentions because I have some tools that I've been recommending to people. And part of it is brand and non-brand mentions in AI citations and building a brand. And it comes back to Google's old kind of SEO algorithm. They talked about this experience and expertise and authoritativeness and trustworthiness. And a lot of that is all built around brand. How do people feel when it's not just the logo and the colors, it's just how do they feel overall when they're on your site and they're shopping shopping and enjoying your product. And I think knowing that, I'm completely in alignment with you about brand and brand mentions and building a brand any way you can. Having a story around that business, I think is key.
For sure. And I think it is something that especially smaller brands typically underinvest in. But now is not the time to underinvest in branding. It's definitely the time to push harder.
So let's talk about some next steps. So, let's say those that are listening right today, if they're, in these crazy systems of either spreadsheets or they're, one of these 120 some thousand that are on the stocky sunset thing that's happening right now. And like I said, by August 31st, they're completely shut off. So what are you suggesting as who is the sweet spot of customer that you believe can Katana be a kind of a crawl, walk, run sort of process where most merchants can see value in the platform and they can continue to use more and more and more of the platform as they become more complex or as they more expand their business? Just curious and kind of who's the sweet spot and kind of what we believe the next steps might be.
Absolutely. Katana can definitely be for everyone. So you can get started for free and up to 30 SKUs. You can run it for free on our free plan. So you can get started immediately and you can get going in your first steps of inventory management very easily in a day or two. But then brands that do have more complex needs, multiple sales channels, multiple locations, warehouses, or integrations that they need to set up, then the easiest way to get started is to contact us and have a solution engineer map out those needs and advise you on the best next steps forward.
Beautiful. So what I'll do is I'll make sure I have all of these details in the show notes. We'll have, you have a really great blog. You have some really great resources, really on katanamrp.com. So I'll make sure that I have all the details in there. And this is really good. I always joke on this podcast. I don't know if you've listened to some of my shows or not, but I always talk about how many pages of notes that I've written because I have this life of learning mantra because I feel that everybody doubles down in the area of their expertise. I know you have a strong marketing background and that's kind of but being, the chief operating officer of this business, clearly you understand the full scope of kind of how this is solving problems for Shopify brands. And I have 2 pages of notes here and this has been a very educational, episode for me. And I've been in this industry for 15 years or more. And every time I record a podcast, I always learn something about, oh, wow, that's what it does. Oh, so cool. Because then you never know, those people that are listening, they might put themselves in those shoes and going, yeah, things are challenging right now with inventory or forecasting or the stocky sunset or, and all of a sudden there's a free solution you can try right away.
Exactly.
And 30-day trial, and you can kind of go down that journey and getting a solution engineer to help you. I think this is great.
Exactly. And it's such a fascinating time right now with all these changes. And I don't think any Shopify merchant should spend all their time worrying about inventory. There are a lot of other things to worry about. So this is one thing that we can take off the list.
Yeah, so that's it. So I guess, if you are affected, by that stocky shutdown, I just want to kind of reiterate it that you have till August 31st. And I think that Katana, even at a bare minimum, starting with the free plan, you can really start today. I believe there's no credit card required. You can literally just go to the website or I think you can go to the Shopify App Store too and download it. I think, and as you mentioned, most brands can be live within a week or less if you're going to do a solution engineer. But gosh, within a few hours, you probably could be live. And, and just basically just see what's going on with your business and help answer a lot of the questions confidently about your inventory and your profitability. I think this has been a great show.
Agreed. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Riikka. Have yourself a great afternoon. Well, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank you personally for being a loyal listener of E-commerce Fastlane. It's my hope that this podcast is offering you a ton of value through growth strategies, tactics, and exclusive insider tips on the best Shopify apps and marketing platforms, all with my personal goal to help you build, manage, grow, and scale a successful and thriving company powered by Shopify. Thanks for investing some time today and listening to the show. I'm so proud and excited that you have a growth mindset and are a constant learner. I truly appreciate you and your entrepreneurial journey. Enjoy the rest of the week and keep thriving with Shopify.